So anyway, the Jericho Energy Task Force welcomes everyone to tonight's presentation. It's the role of ruminants in reversing global warming, how local farmers and ranchers can be climate heroes. Please avail yourself of the cookies. Also, there is an additional container, and that's the first time we've ever done this, and that's for free will donations. And this is for the Maasai tribe that Mr. Itzkan is doing work with, and unfortunately right now, because of an extreme drought, they are suffering, and the cows that they own are dying in large numbers, impacting not only their livelihood but also the potential to continue improving the soil. $5 will pay for a bale of hay, which will keep 2 cows alive for a day, and so all donations will help, and so thank you for that. And then after the documentary, the intro for this is after the documentary Kiss the Ground, we have this Jericho Energy Task Force had it has a hopeful climate message, so the people who attended asked for more information. So then when the task force met again for its next meeting and was discussing how to provide this, Joel Bedard, one of our newer members, said he happened to know Mr. Itzkan, and said he worked in this field. And so although it was a big reach for our small little group, Mr. Itzkan has generally accepted our offer to speak. To start, I'm going to introduce Joel Bedard, who certainly we thank for making this possible. And Joel is a Jericho resident with varied interests, currently interested in system ecology. He's an ecologist, you can call him agroecologist, whatever title you choose. But he's interested in reinvesting in the fabric of community by leveraging decades of experience and expertise. And now for a few words from Joel.
Few words. I'd like to be terse because I want to give Seth all the oxygen that he can handle here. Kathy was absolutely correct. The idea of agroecology and systems ecology didn't really exist back when I started out, and you were hard-pressed to find an academic institute that was not reductionist to some degree, whereas ecology in itself is inherently systems-oriented. So what Seth brings to my expertise and knowledge base is his ability to look at some of the macro systems that define how climate change is occurring globally. And with that, I'm going to hand it off to Seth, and we're going to have a little paneling, some Q&A to bring it back down to a more local level afterwards.
Thanks, buddy.
You got it, man.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Hello, everyone. It's a real pleasure to be here today. My name is Seth Itzkan. I'm with Soil4Climate. We're a nonprofit that advocates for soil restoration as a climate solution. Again, it's an honor to be here. Before I start, let me just thank the people who helped make this possible. Phil Newbeck, Joel Bedard, Catherine McMains, and Holly Hall. Thank you all very much. And also the cable folks. I apologize that I haven't thanked you by name, but thank you all. It really is a joy and honor to put together something like this. And you know, the weeks of email beforehand, it's always a fun, exciting challenge. And then when you meet these people, when you go and meet them, it really is a joy. And I don't take any of this for granted at all, believe me. So thank you. And then in addition to the face-to-face meeting here, and isn't it a pleasure to be able to have face-to-face meetings again, it's going out to Zoom. And I've been pretty active in promoting this event, and Joel has, so who knows? There could be, hundreds of people watching, and then, of course, it's also recorded. So it's a great opportunity, but be careful what you say. So the way I see the format is I'm going to sort of give the big picture, but then Joel will lead us in discussion afterwards where we get down to like specific policy, like my farm, Vermont, Jericho, that type of thing. So my role today is to give literally the big picture. And so the name of the talk is called The Role of Ruminants in Reversing Global Warming. And on the graphic here, I've got a picture of a Maasai herder. This is a colleague of mine. His name is Dalmas Tiampati, and this is in the southwestern part of Kenya. And they're doing a type of grazing called holistic planned grazing. And you notice in the graph there, those are the chemical symbols for CO2 and methane going down. What it means is that it's going into the soil, or its concentration in the atmosphere is being reduced is a technical chemical term, is going down. I choose to title the role of ruminants in reversing global warming very specifically because obviously the ruminants themselves are not doing it, okay? Ruminants are emitting methane, and methane is a natural part of the digestion of the cellulose. And a ruminant, first of all, people ask, well, what is a ruminant? Well, a ruminant is a type of herbivore that has a fourth stomach. It has an extra big stomach called a rumen, which it basically allows it to eat a lot during the day, and then at night it sort of brings it back up again and chews it some more. It's sort of like a container, and that grass technically it ferments, and that's where the methane comes from. This is a natural thing, but the role of the ruminant in a natural grassland ecology or in a facsimile where we manage domestic ruminants as wild animals is to create a healthy grassland, a healthy ecosystem with dark, rich soil and tall grass and a whole vibrant ecosystem. That ecosystem itself is carbon negative. The ecosystem itself is taking both the carbon dioxide and the methane out of the air. Okay, so that's the role of the ruminant in that ecosystem. And what we're trying to get to here is changing the behavior of domestic ruminants so that they replicate or are a facsimile of the wild ruminants that made the grasslands in the first place and that also created a climate suitable for human evolution in the first place. So that's sort of like the big picture. And then it comes down to, a town like Jericho. Okay, well, how can we do different type of, grazing management? So getting to that big picture, I want to, part of this for me is also sort of personal, sort of my own life story. And so let's move on. Oh, good heavens, do I have to click? All right. So to me, this story is a story of the era that we're in. And when I was growing up, I remember when the very first pictures of Earth were published. I was born in 1960, so I was 8.5, going on 9. When this picture came out, I don't really remember in detail, but I do kind of remember that this was going on and that it was somehow important, the notion of seeing the Earth from space. And then this was the New York Times, so let's just go back. This picture was actually taken the day before Christmas. And this was an important week in 1968. Go back and do some research on this. It was the Beatles and the Vietnam War and the protests, and then these pictures and there was environmental, like rivers were catching on fire, and then these pictures came back from space. And this was the day before Christmas. And that was a very important time to be alive. And then this was the cover of the New York Times. Look at the date, December 30th. Right before New Year's, and then the whole world saw this. So it was an important time, and then a few years later, this picture was taken of the whole Earth. This was the 1972. Now this I remember. I was about 12, and I definitely remember this. And these two pictures together became sort of the symbol of the environmental movement. Okay, so why am I sharing all that background? Because of this. This is the picture of restoration. And this, for me, is the next picture of the environmental movement. This in the storyline that I'm trying to create for the next 50 years, if you will, This is the picture that I want people to understand. This is a picture of reversal of desertification. Okay? This is a picture of the earth being healed. Specifically, this is the Kroon family farm in the Karoo region of South Africa. And what's happening here is the land on the left is being restored with ruminants properly managed. So the animals are actually the restoration here, and the land on the right is suffering from a lack of animals. This is an example of restoration with ruminants. In this case, it's sheep, but sheep are ruminants. Okay, so again, a ruminant is the animal that has that extra stomach, and they're getting a bad rap today because they emit methane. Well, yes, they do. All ruminants emit methane. Termites emit methane. Anything that digests cellulose emits methane. But it has to be digested. You know, and the question is, what's the context and the management? So obviously, if they're all in a feedlot, well, that's a problem. But if they're out moving in nature properly, that's not a problem. That's what you want. So the takeaway of this message is that the ruminants themselves are what restored the land. And frankly, most of the semi-arid seasonal rainfall environments of the world are turning to desert, and we've come to think that's just the way they are. That's not the way they are. They should be tall, healthy grasslands. Now, you hear a lot about overgrazing. Well, yes, you can get that problem too. Yes, you can have overgrazing if you just keep a few sheep or goats or cattle in one spot and you don't move them. Yes, they will overgraze. But you see, you can also get what's called under-impact. Under-impact. And the land on the right is suffering from a lack of animals. You need the animals in these dry land areas to move the nutrients and the moisture across the landscape during the dry season. These are seasonal rainfall environments. Like most of South Africa, Johannesburg gets as much rain as London. It gets as much rain as London. But the ecosystem there is entirely different because it comes all in 3 months during the monsoon season. And for the rest of the year, there's no rain. It's not the quantity of rain, although that's obviously a factor. It's also the seasonality of it. And in these seasonal rainfall environments, you have to have large herds of ruminants moving across the land, bringing the moisture and the nutrients. So you can both have overgrazing at the same time that you have under impact. So imagine just like one goat or sheep just walking around. Yes, they'd keep going back to the same plant. They'd be overgrazing it. But the landscape itself would be under impacted. Do you understand what I'm saying? You see, you need to have there would have been massive herds. I mean, tens of millions of animals in a herd moving across. And they might all go through in a day. And then the next day, they're gone, but the land is trampled and the dung in Europe. So that's the general science, if you will, of how land is restored with ruminants. Of course, I get into it in much more detail. This is a picture of how that same place looks from Google Earth Pro. I don't know, do I have control of my mouse here? Okay, so here's the picture you just saw. These other pictures, these are Google Earth Pro. And these are the coordinates down here. I mean, I should just put the coordinates up there. You can fire it up on your own. You could go to Google Earth on your laptop right now and fire up these places. Now, in terms of solving the global warming problem, there's already too much carbon in the air. It has to come out. Okay, so where's it going to go? Well, it turns out that soil is a major, quote-unquote, sink for carbon. The carbon dioxide is broken down through photosynthesis, and it gets emitted out through the roots of plants. It's called the exudates. Exudates. It's basically sugar. You can think of it like pine tar. That sticky stuff that comes out of pine. It's kind of like that, but it comes out of roots. It's basically sugar. It's carbon. It's carbon chains. But the carbon came from the CO2 in the air. All right? And so most of the semi-arid seasonal rainfall parts of the world that are called grasslands or some sort of grassland. Many of them have now become desert. But this is actually most of the world. Most of the world is actually in this type of ecosystem. The temperate areas, Northern Europe, New England, a lot of eastern United States, we sort of take it for granted that there's always rain. That's actually not the case in most of the world. Most of the world is some type of grassland ecosystem which co-evolved with animals, grazing over large areas, and had soil that was rich in carbon. Now, this sort of shows the flows of the carbon, and the numbers represent billions of tons of carbon. So any number you see there is billions of tons of carbon, or also gigatons. I kind of liked, there's the mouse, but I don't know, I prefer just to walk around. So soil 2,300, that's 2,300 billion tons of carbon in soil. Now you see it says plant biomass 550 and atmosphere 800. So 800 and 550 is 1,350. 2,300, there's almost twice as much carbon in soil than in plant biomass and the atmosphere combined. Okay? So soil is where the game is being played in terms of the carbon cycle, that we can control, the terrestrial carbon cycle. There's also, of course, the ocean carbon cycle. There's not a lot we can do about that, although we have to keep the kelp forests alive, and we have to keep fish and large ocean mammals alive. That goes without saying. They're an essential part of it as well. But in terms of, agriculture and land management, soil is really where the game is going to be played. Now, you see here it says fossil fuel 10,000. Okay, so there's a huge amount of carbon in the fossil pool, but it's not normally part of the cycle until, of course, we drill for it. When you get the carbon and you get the oil and the methane, you're bringing this into the equation. Normally, it wouldn't be there, of course. So anyway, that's the point about this, that there's a huge reserve there that can go either way. You can lose it through improper land management, but you can also bring it back through, quote-unquote, regenerative agriculture. And that's what we advocate for, regenerative agriculture. And big part of regenerative agriculture will be regenerative grazing and will be the ruminants. And that's the quandary, if you will, that the environmental movement is in, because there's so much political capital now invested in trying to shame ruminants and meat. And in my opinion, it's misplaced. It's misplaced. What is appropriate to shame is the industrialization of the food system itself and turning plots of land into like commodities. That's a problem. But the ruminants are not the problem. The ruminants, in fact, are essential to the solution. And I wish my colleagues in the climate movement would start to realize that. Okay, so just moving on, more of the science. This is just sort of a simplified way of explaining what you just saw, the sort of sources and sinks. This is just the fossil carbon. It's actually close to 11 now. This is 11 billion tons of carbon per year. Okay. Unfortunately, this number is changing practically in real time. But anyway, it goes up. There's only 3 places it can go: oceans, atmosphere, and what they call the terrestrial sphere. The oceans and the atmosphere are both bad. When it dissolves in the ocean, it becomes what's called carbonic acid, which dissolves coral reefs. Bad stuff. When it goes to the atmosphere, it creates global warming. Bad. But when it goes to terrestrial sphere, that's good. That's actually what you want. And so the overall goal is to reduce these, but to increase that. And the climate movement in general is focused entirely on this. And that's good. I'm glad it is. But it needs to start to focus more on this too. And again, ruminants are essential to this. So this is the quandary in the environmental movement. And I'm smack in the middle of it all the time. You have debates about meat and cows and all that stuff. I'm sure you all are familiar with it. I just say, let's just talk about the soil. Are you sourcing food in a way that's improving soil? Just yes or no. If the answer is yes, good. Okay? If the answer is not, think about, you know, how it could be. And so here you can literally see it. So this is a cross section. Well, just to back up a little bit. This is from an exhibit of the U.S. Botanical Society. It was called Exposed: The Secret Life of Roots. And these are actual perennial grasses. And this is obviously just a photographic, cross-section of soil. But these are actual plant roots. Look at how they're folded. I mean, this would be 10, 12 feet deep. This is what the Great Plains used to be like, okay? Most of Middle America used to be like that. And of course, there were massive amounts of animals up here. If they were to redo this exhibit again, I would advocate for them putting, pictures of animals. Basically, buffalo is what was the principal megafauna there, but others as well, of course. And even in the soil, there would have been burrowing creatures. And literally, you can literally see the carbon. I mean, that's why good soil is dark. It's that simple. So I call it an animal continent. Now, there was a very horrific part of the U.S. history, which we need to visit it now just for the sake of this talk, where there was the intentional genocide of buffalo, close to tens of millions. The numbers vary between about 40 and 70 million. This was a horrific episode in our history, intentionally killing these megafauna. All right, let's just move on. It happened. About 60 years later, we have this. We have these massive dust bowl. Is there a connection? Okay. Now, I was thinking about this today. I mean, this is where, Woody Guthrie, right? The stories of the Depression came from. And Woody Guthrie goes to Bob Dylan, goes to the Beatles, goes to Bang, 1969, all over again, the picture of the Earth, right? You could hear John Lennon singing, give peace a chance and whatever. And so it is an interesting sort of cosmic, karma, if you will. The whole movement from intentionally killing these animals to the Dust Bowl to the beginning of sort of a national environmental and civic consciousness, which led to the 60s. And now I'm trying to say we need to do it again. And it needs to be about restoration. So now let's just go back into some more science. You guys don't mind science, right? Okay, you're okay with science? All right. So there are two graphs up here, and they're both the same time scale. They're both a 500 million year time scale, 500 million years. Okay, this is a big story. All right. The difference between the and let's just start with the top one. It's a temperature graph. Okay, so what it's basically showing is the temperature variations of the Earth over 500 million years. Now, the top is what they call the sort of the hothouse Earth. The bottom is what they call the icehouse Earth. And you can see that there's basically been three main cooling periods. Oh, now I have control of my mouse. I don't know why I do now. I didn't have it before. Okay. This one. There's a sort of a middle cooling period here, and then this one. But you can see that over it is a long time. It's a 500 million years. It's been three major cooling periods. Okay. Now, the difference between the top graph and the bottom one is logarithmic. Please stick with me on this, okay? The bottom one is meant to favor the present, okay? So the entire 50 million years here is represented in this whole section here. And so you see these are in units of 100 million years, and then these are in units of 10 million years, and these are in units of million years, and these are in units of 200,000 years, and these are in units of 5,000 years. You see what's going on? The bottom graph is trying to get a magnifying glass, if you will, on the more recent part. Okay. So, why were these epic cooling periods? Well, the first one was the evolution of life on land. That was it. That's what created this profound cooling, was literally life on land. And so there's literally the biomass in the life itself, but the life, these mosses, are dissolving the rock. There's an oxidation process, and that itself is also pulls CO2 out of the air. Okay? Now, there are then periods where it warms again. I don't want to get into that right now, but then there's another major cooling period, and this is basically the evolution of forests. Really what happened is that nature invented a molecule called lignin, and lignin creates rigidity, and it allows trees to grow up and allows roots. And so this is called vascular plants. Okay? That was a profound drop down in carbon. Okay? Now, this area, this is called the Carboniferous period. All of the coal and oil that we're burning right now, all of it, came from these trees and the biomass that around 300 million years ago. And where did the trees get that carbon from? They got it from the atmosphere. We're literally burning an ancient atmosphere. Can you kind of grok that? The carbon went into the trees, it fossilized, it became coal or oil, and that's now what we're pumping out of the ground. Ancient life, but that life came out of the atmosphere. It was a cooling period. We're literally recreating the hothouse that period reversed. Okay, then there was a sort of a middle cooling period here where flowering plants evolved. It gave plants another boost. But what I want to talk about is this third one here, about 50 million years ago. This is as big a cooling period as any time in the last 500 million years. Does anyone want to guess, before I show you, what happened? What was the evolutionary innovation that happened starting around 50 million years ago that created this sort of epic cooling period that we're in now? I mean, other than the human-induced global warming, which is, a fraction of a second in terms of evolutionary time. In terms of evolutionary time, this is the story, this cooling period. Does anyone want to guess what it is? Dinosaurs. No, I'm sorry, it wasn't dinosaurs. Dinosaurs were actually wiped out here. See where it says KT impact? That's actually when the dinosaurs got wiped out. What was that? Mammals is good. Keep going. Ruminants. And what else? Because ruminants don't actually sequester the carbon. So what co-evolved with the ruminants? The grasslands. Exactly. Bang. There you have it. Ruminants and grasslands. And a new type of soil called a mollisol. Basically means a soft soil. That was the evolutionary innovation which created the cooling, that created the conditions suitable for human evolution in the first place. And so you see, we're basically still in that story. Obviously, in terms of human time, we're changing things. But in terms of, evolutionary time, we're in this story. And so that's really my takeaway message for you to understand, that ruminants are what created the cooling, that created the conditions for human evolution in the first place. It's profound, the amount of carbon that they, with grasslands, took out of the air. It's equivalent to all the major cooling periods in the last 500 million years. So now we blow up that period into this so you can see it better. So now you see the evolution of grasslands and ruminants. Then this is the ice ages. Now, the ice ages are caused by a little wobble on the Earth. It's always been there, right? The Earth didn't just start wobbling. but it doesn't show up. The signal is too weak when there's high concentrations of CO2. Concentrations of CO2 need to get pretty low before the ice ages are relevant, before the change in solar radiation in the wobble is relevant. And so the reason why we even have the ice ages, the reason why we notice them, is because the CO2 dropped so much, the temperature dropped so much during the evolution of ruminants and grasslands. Okay, that's this period here, and then this is sort of human time frames now, you know, and then this is the beginning of agriculture, about 10,000 years ago. And we actually should be in the next ice age. It should be going back down again. It should be getting colder. About 5,000 years ago, the next ice age should have started. We've been holding it off. We've been holding it off. And now, of course, we're jumping up. We're going the other way. So ice ages, agriculture, and then there, see, I've got the tractor and the factory. See, there's the factory there. So it's jumping up. So this is the model that's out of sync with nature. It's the whole model. It's not just meat or animals. It's the industrialization of annual crops, turning a perennial landscape into an annual landscape. That's the problem. So I'm going to jump ahead now because, as always, I just get, you know, sucked up in the science. But I want people to understand the science. It's important. I'll just do a few more of the science things, and then I'll show some examples of restoration. So this is an important paper. It's called Global Cooling by Grassland Soils of the Geologic Past and Near Future. How about that, huh, for a title? And this paper just, this is the technical paper of the graph that I just showed you. You can see the time scales here, starting 50 million years, you know, to the present, and then so this is the evolution of the type of grazers and the soil. And then this graph, again, it's nerdy, but you can handle it. So let's just start with what's being presented. It's different places, right? Oregon, Montana, Great Plains, Kenya, Nepal. Okay, so it's different places. This is milliliters of rainfall, and this is millions of years ago. So this says 400 milliliters of rain 30 million years ago in this place in Oregon, 20 million years ago, present. And then there's one other piece of information, which is the color coding, and that's the type of soil. Aridosols, desert soils, bunch grass, mollisol. The mollisol, that's the carbon-rich grassland soils. And then there's like woodland soils, okay? So you look all across the world at the same amount of rainfall, bang, something happens around 20 million years ago, all around the world. This type of soil starts to show up a lot. Same amount of rain, right? This type of soil shows up. And that's, I'll go back, that's this type of soil called the mollisol. And basically, when you think of agriculture, when you think of the Midwest, that's the soil, the mollisol soil. New England soil is different. You know, there's an entirely different system here. All right, so that was, you know, thank you for indulging me in that little nerdy slide. And, you know, so let's talk now about, you know, the practices. You know, how are we going to get it back? And then, you know, any technique that improves soil is good. Obviously, in a place like New England, or Oregon, I'm not sure where this picture is taken, but obviously this is a natural forested area. He's got pine trees there. So reforestation, this is just meant to symbolize like organics, no-till agriculture, biochar is becoming a bigger thing. I'm not prepared to talk a lot about that now, but you're going to be hearing more about that. Those are all important. But my focus and the focus of this talk is specifically on the ruminant part. I'm not trying to say that the others aren't also important. They're all important. But my focus is on this, in part because it is controversial. So I really want to address that point. And that's the controversial part, where you can say that livestock can be a proxy for wild herds. And there are people who are doing it. And there's a practice called holistic management. A lot of these were pictures that you see are pictures I took myself. And you see a mixed species herd. Looks like goats in this case, but lots of times you'll see sheep, goats, cows. I mean, it has to be a domestic animal, obviously. But the wild animals are out there. They're waiting in the wings when, they come around. And here's an example of a restoration. We call this the elbow site just because that kind of looks like an elbow, 2006. Then there's the same spot, 2013. See, this is an example of restoration. And it was done with the animals. The animals were essential to that restoration. And then this is just sort of seeing the two together. And then that's that same spot again in 2014. Here's another spot. They call this the two-tree spot. These are all at the Africa Center for Holistic Management in Zimbabwe. They call it the two-tree site just because there's sort of like two trees in the middle there. And then again, you see the grass coming back. That's me. That's yours truly next to the tree there. And then, let's see, and then I do, oh, there it is. Okay, I was ahead on the slides here. That's me again. So I went back at different times. There's conjuncture. Okay, so somehow it's a little out of sync with what I'm seeing on my laptop and what's showing up. Anyway, you get the idea. Animals are the only thing that's being used. There's no irrigation. It's just animals being moved properly. And now you can see, so this is, let me just go back to this slide. So this plant here, this is called Panica maximum. Look at the seed heads here. This is what's called a high succession plant. This plant can only live in the best soil conditions. It's an indicator species of things being very good. And then you can see here, you can see the millipedes. See it? And the fungus. Those are signs of healthy soil. I just kind of want to go on because there's a lot of slides. And I want to have a lot of time for, discussion and stuff. You should be able to see is there more here? Yeah. So these pictures were all taken by me on the same day. Believe it or not, I believe this was Earth Day in 2019. The bottom is the now I don't have the mouse, so there it is the Africa Center for Holistic Management in Zimbabwe, and this is Victoria Falls National Park. But they're a short drive. It's about a 20-minute drive from each other. Everything's exactly the same terrain, same rain, everything. But just look at the difference of the landscape. Look at this erosion. And this is a national park. This is the Africa Center for Holistic Management down here. This is, of course, it's a national park, so can't have cattle. And frankly, the wild animals are just gone. They don't have the density. Yeah, 150, 250 years ago, there would have been giraffe and zebra and gazelle and everything else going through here, and it would have looked like that. But they're not there anymore. That's why they're using livestock to be a proxy. So anyway, let's just move on. This was an example from Mexico. Now what's going on here is this is just sort of, it's called the catchment dam. It's just meant to catch the water from the rain. And then this is, a good 40 years later, the same spot. This land was restored with holistic planned grazing. This practitioner was one of the very first people to start doing it. And the very first picture that I started with in the beginning in the South Africa picture, that practitioner was also one of the first people to start doing it. Now, what I've been told is that this was a 1-inch rain, and that now they can get a 6-inch rain and not have standing water in the depression. So in theory, sometimes I say, oh, next slide. Yeah, which side has more water? See, in theory, there could be 6 times more water on this side, but you don't see it because it's in life. And let me just quickly run ahead to the projects that Soil4Climate is working on. So Soil4Climate is, my organization is working on a project in Kenya. We helped get the training and the cows for the Maasai herd. This is in Zimbabwe. This is Zambia, mixed species herd. You can see there's sheep and cattle in here, but see, they're in a forest. That's okay. This is called silvopasture. You graze right through the forest. It's not one or the other. Here you see the sheep. It's just a car battery to make an electric fence. See that? And then getting back to the projects that Soil4Climate is working on. Again, this is my colleague in Kenya. This is training in a holistic plant management. This is training coming out into the field. It's kind of hard to see, but what they're saying is that when the cow takes one bite of the grass, the roots die back, but then it grows back again, and then they take the next bite. So the idea is just like one bite, move on. Like, don't allow the second bite. You see cows around here, unfortunately. Their head is right down to the ground. There's like nothing. So, this area is very tolerant. There's so much rain here, it can kind of tolerate that to a point. Most of the dryland world, it can't tolerate that. Yeah, question?
Was that picture depicting that you wanted the herders out there to move them along after their first bite?
Yeah, so this is a training. So there's a place called the Mara Training Center in West Kenya. And so what we did was we brought some elders from the community to the Mara Training Center. And then the people from the Mara Training Center went out to the community. So that's what this is. This is a community business.
So the herders are moving the animals along pretty quickly, that they only have a chance to take one bite of
one
the
bite.
plant?
Yeah, there's something called the I forget the expression, but it's like the curse of the second bite. It's something like that. You don't want them to get the second bite. Yeah. And then we built an earth dam, kind of like the other place. It's understood this is just a temporary solution. The earth dam. You shouldn't need it. But these are desperate times. We're doing, you have to do both at the same time. You have to help. People are dying. Animals are dying. You have to help them out. And you have to try to move the whole process along. And then a new corral. And again, you can use a new corral, but you also want to have mobile corrals. Both. You'll purchase a new bull, good genetics, so growing the herd. So grazing plants, so multiple paddocks. So each of these is a paddock with the area in hectares and acres, I think. Oh, no. That's just a paddock number. That's just a paddock number. And then that's the area. I forget if it's in hectares or acres. But anyway, the idea is to have as many paddocks as possible. Even this could be more. This is a real sinister thing. It's a weed. It's called morning glory. You know, to the untrained visitor, if you're just a tourist and you go out there and you see these white flowers, you think, oh, nice, you know, white flowers. It's actually a horror show. You see, they're everywhere. It's called an invasive weed. And I say it's not invasive, it was invited. How did you invite it? By destroying the biodiversity in the soil, right? Getting the nods out there. Okay, so let me just share something quick, then I'll just try to assemble. Well, this again, where it gets sort of personal. It's almost difficult to talk about. What do you think is the official government recommendation? By government, I mean the Ministry of Agriculture in Kenya. Their official recommendation on their webpage, you could even Google it right now, type morning glory, eradication, Kenya, whatever. What do you think is the official recommendation for how to eradicate morning glory? Roundup. Exactly. Now, who's going to apply it?
Not them.
Who's going to apply it? Okay, this is a gender role issue. Okay, men are with the cows. This is considered gardening. That's considered a female job. So they got the women out there spraying the Roundup. And not only that, but the official recommendation is to actually cut it at the root with a hoe, not at the root, at the stem, and then take like a paintbrush, dip it into an exposed bucket of Roundup, and then paint it on the newly exposed stem. That's the official recommendation, and they even had a news slot that I saw while I was there, where they were praising that they had done that. And they showed a picture of the women in the traditional Maasai thing out in the field, and the guy just said, he just said matter of factly, he says, yeah, I hired the women. You know, and they're proud of it, and this is like on TV. Like, oh, look. Okay? How should we eradicate that? Okay? Ruminants or some type of grazing animal. Now, they're not going to eat it. They say not even the goats will eat it. So what are you going to do? You're just going to stomp it. You're just going to just walk them back and forth, or even set up a corral here. See? Even though they're not even going to eat it, you can still eradicate it with ruminants. And then they'll put all the dung there. The soil biodiversity will come back. The next year, you know, you'll start to get grasses there. They should be being eradicated with animals. So that's you know, some of what we're up against. So let me just, this is some of the training in the community. So our partner organization is called the Maasai Center for Regenerative Pastoralism. And then I gave a talk at the University of Nairobi on all this, and then that's us all together. Okay, so I think I'm gonna stop there. We have Soil4Climate hats. It goes to a good cause. This is 50% organic cotton and hemp. Okay, this is not your typical staples.com hat. Okay, it was a special procurement to get these. You can buy them on the website for $29, whatever. You can get them today for $25. If you don't have the cash, I'll give it to you, but if you would make a donation to us via the web, I would appreciate that. And if you want to make a donation to Soil4Climate, I was given permission to do a pitch for fundraising. We really appreciate it. These are kind of desperate times now. So if you or your organization wants to support us, we would greatly appreciate it. All right. Thank you very much. I'm done with my talk. Thank you. Thank you. Joel, you want to come up now? And well, what I think we should do now is I think you should come up here. Joel will be the kind of the local guy, and I'll be the big picture guy. And let's just really even have a discussion about, if you have big picture concepts about all this, ask me. But if you have okay, well, what are we going to do today, tomorrow, here? Let's get Joel in on that.
Okay, Seth.
All right.
It's supposed to crowd in there, right? I'm a little bit of a different sort than a lot of the folks in the audience in that I spend way too much time thinking about things like this. You've repackaged a lot of knowledge that I already had, but put it in a more salient offering. And I can't help revisiting something that has been constantly on my mind for decades, and that is the anthropogenic projection that we have upon geologic systems. That the Earth was in a dynamic, steady state. It had figured it out with the mollisols, the grasslands, the ruminants, and then we come along and we say, hey, let's kick it in the shins and see what happens. Well, now we're seeing what happens, but we're trying to, and it's going to happen anyways. We're trying to force an anthropogenic solution on an anthropogenic problem, but there's this palate that is going to have the last say. It had the first say, it's going to have the last say. And it feels like we're just kind of, sometimes it feels like you're spitting in the wind. But we do what we do for the betterment of society and of the people. And lately, as well, one of the things that's been crossing my mind, and I utilized this a few times, was it stemmed. You can guess by the dates, but it stemmed from a conversation with someone that I knew they were out of their depth. I said, look, in 1776, there were 800 million humans on the Earth. Now there are 8 billion humans, and they're like, so what? And I said, yeah. It's the difference between walking into a room with 10 people or walking into a room with 100 people. Try to get some sense of order and the difference and the resources that you need between 10 and 100 people. So, this is an extremely important look at the global scale. I would love to hear if you're game, just a snippet of any of your interactions with Alan Savory or his family while you're out there.
Sure. If people don't know who Alan Savory is, he's the one that invented the concept of holistic management and holistic planned grazing. And there's sort of two aspects of this. There's just the science aspect, which is moving domestic ruminants in a way that is a facsimile of wild ruminants. Okay, that's sort of the biological aspect of it. But there's a sort of a social aspect of it called holistic management in general, or holistic context setting. And that has to do, and that gets nerdy too, but it has to do with dealing with complex systems. And it's reductionism versus holism, and trying to deal with social, environmental, and economic things all at the same time. And so there's sort of a management framework which attempts to try to do that. And so it's hard, but that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to manage those things, and the problem is when you try to create an ecosystem and people in an ecosystem like a commodity, try to create the industrialized model of it. It just doesn't work. You get what's called wicked problems because these are self-correcting systems. They're just other things will start to happen. Let me just say something really quick. about that in terms of systems. So just sort of like negative things can like spiral, positive things can spiral. Let me give you an example. Getting back to the ruminants in the middle of the country, someone was saying that her vision was to see all the corn and soybeans in America back to, prairie again with ruminants. So if you treat the ruminant like a car, like a tailpipe, if you just say, well, there's so much methane coming out of each animal, then you could say, okay, well, then I guess we need to get rid of all the animals, right? If that's your own goal, if that's the only goal is to reduce the methane, right? But then you turn the whole Midwest into a desert, okay? Or if you say, oh, we'll just keep growing corn and soy, you're losing soil. It's going into the Gulf of Mexico. It's creating anoxia in the Gulf. You've got these massive dead zones. Okay, dead zones become sources of methane, right? The stagnant water becomes a methane source, which far outweighs what the methane that was coming from the cows. And then you kill the ability of fish to move and to stir the water around, which is a carbon sink. You see, but then when you restore it, if you bring the animals back and you bring back the soil, you stop the erosion, you clear the dead zone, right? And now, so these are complex systems that they're all connected. And if you do one thing bad, it ripples around. But if you do one thing good, it also ripples in a good way. Okay? Yes?
I'm just thinking in terms of like financial incentives. If you had like 10 minutes with, I'm coming from Wisconsin, if you had 10 minutes with like 100 Wisconsin farmers, what were the three recommendations that you would give that you think they would believe you after you spoke to them?
So, you see, the thing is, the incentives are already in place for them to be doing CAFOs, concentrated animal feeding operations. I mean, the incentives are there. There's a guaranteed price on corn, right? There's a bottom. The insurance, you can't get crop insurance or you can't get an insurance policy unless you're following the rules, right? So I don't blame them for going along with this system. They're not the ones at fault. It's not like they want to destroy the soil, but that's the model that they're just another commodity. They're just a plug and play into this larger thing. And so the 2 points of intervention are consumers willing to pay for a product that's sourced differently? And can the insurance companies start to change their underwriting because they're tired of, writing the bills for all the failures down the road? It may not be a crop failure, but somewhere else there's a flood or a drought. So now what Alan Savory would say in terms of the holistic management is everyone needs to come together and create what he would call a holistic context. We all need it. You need to have the insurance people and the consumers and the producers and the politicians. They all need to come together and they all need to say, look, how can we manage this system? This is a complex system. So that's a way of sort of avoiding the answer. Alan Savory would say, well, I don't know what to tell them. I would tell them to create a holistic context, to get together with everyone and just start to kick it around and see what comes.
First thing I tell them is that cheese is not orange. No, I mean, you're touching on and delicately avoiding something that I will speak to.
Go for it. I'm happy to be the avoider.
That is that there's an entire structure set up that effectively exposes the farmer. Same thing with teachers. These are some of our most vital roles in society, and we treat them, the individuals themselves, as commodities. So there's an entire system set up in farming where, I'm okay with this as an example, but it is a true reality that the Farm Bill is effectively written by California. You know, it works in our favor, generally speaking. Patrick Leahy's been fantastic, and I expect nothing less from Senator Welch. But the bottom line here is that there are forces greater than a farmer that dictate the policy and then dictate who gets the subsidies, why they get the subsidies. You know, I almost brought a book with me tonight. There's a national science tome that is basically, you got to order it from the federal government. It's a thick, chewy piece, but it dictates all policy for all major national and international decisions on agriculture right now, until that is rewritten. And that has nothing to do with the Farm Bill, but it does have to do with what is a national security issue, our food systems. And that's something that I work on in the background, is shortening the distance between the farm and the plate. It is removing the challenges of logistics, because we're seeing it right now where, you know, we've got Ukraine, that's a major breadbasket in the world. We've got the Ogallala and San Juan aquifers that are beyond recharge rate, and without the ruminants and we're going to see another dust bowl. It's just a matter of when. So we're draining the water. We're not allowing to recatch the water, so that there are all these major concerns on the globalization of the agricultural system. Whereas what we have here in Vermont is atypical. The ability to know who your farmer is, to have a CSA. I know that 90% of my produce that my wife and I consume comes from within 15 minutes of my house. You know, whether it's Jared Settler's farm, or maybe it's Boyden for some nice beef or whatnot, or whatnot. And that doesn't exist in very many places, especially with how our society's developed, with these needs for bringing in truck after truck after truck into these great big cities. I'm not saying break up the cities, but we've got to shorten things somehow, and we've got to be more efficient with what we have. I mean, have you seen the greenhouses in Spain?
I haven't, no.
It's like miles upon miles upon miles upon miles of you can't see any ground, because it's all greenhouses. And that's a grand model for production, but it's a horrible model for ecological sensitivity. So, you know, corn's the big one.
Let's take questions.
Yeah. Dave, you're welcome to come and join us. You and Chris were two that I had actually asked.
By the way, I love the fact that there's all these couches in here. It's the first time I've given a presentation
Trust
where,
me, man, if we could get the camera up here, we'd be sitting down there too.
you know, it's very cozy. I like it. Yeah.
Practicality question. So you've got these farmers here. They have how many hectares? So you would go and talk to them and say, you've got this land that needs to be fixed. And we want you to use ruminants to do that. And you've got so much space. You're talking tens of thousands? You're talking 10 ruminants? Are you talking 15,000? 500? What is the relationship that the balance that you're trying to achieve when you're training these people, so that they're not going beyond, but they're keeping up? And so how do you move them? You talk about the one bite and move on. How does that all come together? And so when you train these people, I think you would need to give them the black and white reality of what they can understand, and to make this successful.
Right. So just to be really clear, I'm not a trainer. Okay. I'm a scientist and an advocate for getting the carbon out of the air and into the soil. Okay. The training that I recommend, and when we went to Kenya, the Mara Training Center is a Savory Institute hub. So they're a hub of the Savory Institute, and they teach holistic plant grazing. So what I did was I raised the money to bring my colleagues over to the Mara Training Center to learn holistic plant grazing. And the first step will be for them to make a holistic context. So just to be really clear, I'm not I'm not an agriculturalist. I'm a city boy, frankly.
So we'd
Okay.
have to develop an algorithm that would be based upon the current degradation state of the land, what type of ruminants, hindgut fermenters are available, and then kind of what your end goal is.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I would say hook up with a savory hub and start practicing holistic planned grazing, develop a holistic context with everyone involved, like really like bump it up to that level. You know, that's the only advice that I would give to a practitioner. I wouldn't pretend to tell a practitioner what to do, other than to say, here, call the Savory Institute, you know, talk to their experts, let them help you create your own plan. See, so they would always say, you don't tell someone how many numbers or when to move or how many packs. Like, no, they need to figure that out based on their own, you know, bigger planning. So just so we're really clear about that, right? I'm not. My goal. I'm trying to convince the policy types that ruminants have to be part of the answer. That's my job. And then when it gets to be specific, like, well, how do you do it? Then that's where I have the handoff. Well, okay, call these people.
Call Alan, tell him Seth.
Well, call, you know.
What's his daughter's in the business now?
Yeah, Sarah Savory is in the business, but there's like dozens of holistic hubs now. Yeah.
I'll get a couple more over here. Dave, I do want to revisit because I want you on record as what your role is with the town.
Sure. So recently we took a vote at town meeting this past March.
Let's do up front talk.
Yeah, let's get you, come on up here. Does he need to stand next to me for the mic?
Yeah.
I guess so. So I'm actually wearing a mic, so you need to stand next to
Talking
me.
to your, well,
Yeah, yeah.
So I'm Dave Clifton. I work with a team of folks from Jericho, Transition Town Jericho, and you know, our mission is to make change within the community at the grassroots level. It's starting with the people in the community and looking towards them as the solution to the problems that we identify. And one of the things that we did is we went to the town at town meeting day and asked the town if they would be interested in forming a food hub task force. And the food hub task force was voted on and was approved by the town. And we're just getting started with a team of about 12 to 14 people to start looking at what the town may be interested in doing and what the people on this task force are interested in doing and where the energy lies with these people to promote food stability and resiliency for the town and for surrounding communities. So that includes, you know, all aspects of the food chain. And like I said, we're just getting started. There's an interest at all levels, everything from what we call the makers, the people who take the raw materials and add value to the raw materials by producing products, to hopefully working with some of the local farmers to get their produce directly from the farm, directly to the people, and getting people to learn to know and understand the farmers, and hopefully establishing within the community, establishing relationships with the farmers so that the farmers can look out into the community and say, I have a viable place to sell my goods and services. And if I have that, I know what I need to do. Whereas in some of the other markets, you know, it depends on supply and demand that's outside the region, which we don't have control of. So we're hoping that movement, the food hub movement, will help address some of those problems. So of course, this is an interesting area because we need to sustain the resources that we have. And by sustaining the resources that we have, we can move forward
not just today, but 4 to 15 years, 20 years, 40 to 50 years from now. And that's as important as anything.
So Seth is actually up from Thetford and also works in Massachusetts for some of his gear. He probably doesn't spend a lot of time in Chittenden County, so I would describe us as the kind of the edge between Vermont and Chittenden County, and we're protected by a moat called the Winooski River. So we're in a position here where we could either become Williston or we could stay kind of where we are and maintain more of an agrarian and agricultural focused community.
Thank you. Yeah.
I'm wondering, I fully understand the ruminant carbon sequestration model, but have you found, either of you guys maybe, or anyone in here, have you found any other ways to increase soil carbon besides a grassland ruminant model?
Plugging for biochar.
Oh, well, yeah. I mean, when I first started, I showed a bunch of methods, but I said I just want to focus on this one. I mean, we could do a whole week on biochar. And biochar is very important. I mean, I definitely want to put a plug out there for biochar. I definitely see that being an important part of this.
At this point, it's a minuscule part.
Yeah.
Whereas ruminant agriculture, with holistic and rotational grazing,
biochar needs to be bigger, but just the cover crops, non-till, organic. I mean, it's sort of obvious in a way, but I mean, it's not controversial. I like this topic because it is controversial.
I'll free range this one. One of my personal what if we's in the wee hours a few years ago was looking at the primary carbon sinks on the planet, which are clearly the soil and the ocean. But in terms of biota, we're looking at plankton. And plankton can be cultured. And I was thinking to myself, what would it take to have a plankton factory inland and then brick all of that and use that as like a biochar type of applicator?
Yeah. And the kelp forests, underwater, they have to be preserved and brought back. I don't want to make it sound like this is the only thing, but it's so central to the discussion of food.
Absolutely.
And most of the land area, is in some sort of system like this. So that's why I'm just sort of eyeball deep on this topic. But I mean, if you were to have like a seminar, I would just be one speaker. And you'd have someone else on biochar and someone else on oceans and whatever. We need to do all of it, but this is the one that's kind of true to my heart. Now, someone like Gabe Brown, who's one of those sort of celebrity farmers, he'll tell you. He's told me, or he'll tell you. He said, we had moved to less, or to sort of better cropping. I think he'd gone organic, and he had covered crops, and he was doing everything right from the cropping point of view. And yes, the soil was getting better, little changes each year, but as soon as they brought in the grazing, bang. I mean, the change was like overnight. So yes, all of those methods are important, but really the ruminants are going to be the dominant thing. And of course, it isn't just ruminants. I mean, pigs aren't ruminants, chicken aren't ruminants, and those are typically part of the rotation. But that's basically what happens, is you get the herd of the cows and the sheep go by. Then you bring in the chickens, and then you have the mobile pig thing, on the side. But the ruminant, they're the dominant megafauna. They're really what is making the thing happen. And the other animals, frankly, are like ancillary. Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
Mind if we get Lynn real quick?
Yeah.
I was just wondering, you do a lot of your work in Kenya and so on. Is there any way to break into having the ideas that you have to reverse our industrial agricultural, especially in the Midwest and so on? Do you ever partner with West Jackson, the Land Institute, getting prairie grasses and so on, and the same kind of idea? But I think probably a big problem is our entrenched industrial agricultural system, and everybody here, you know, even in Vermont where people are buying, you know, Nabisco, whatever. And the only way to change it is that people demand other things, but many people don't understand this very well.
Do you want me to answer it from the Kenya point of view, which is sort of how you started it?
Yeah.
You see, I'm really excited about that. Kenya, I really think Kenya is going to be one of the most important countries in the future. I mean, you look at where it, literally where it is. It's between the Middle East and Europe and the rest of Africa, and it could be a phenomenal example of restoration. It could be an export, you know, country, and it still has large traditional pastoral communities. And
I was there, I worked there in the early 1980s, and I was particularly interested in the Maasai because when I was there, their herds were, you know, moving over the land, but everywhere they were moving, there was dust all around, and the Maasai Mara was, you know, it used to have a lot of zebra and all the gazelles and everything, but so they're gone now, right?
Largely, yeah. I mean, there's trace amounts left, but not nearly enough.
There was kind of an animosity between the agrarian groups and the Maasai because, you know, the water.
Right. And you see, this is this either or. Everything is framed as an either or. Either you're doing cattle grazing or you have wildlife. You know, and they're somehow in competition. It doesn't have to be like that. At the Africa Center for Holistic Management, where do you think the giraffes and the elephants are going? You think they're going to the Victoria Falls National Park where there's no grass left? They're going to the Africa Center for Holistic Management. If you were a giraffe or an elephant, where would you go? You know, so they are rewilding. That whole word rewilding is a word I have problems with because it's meant to imply, no, you out. And, you know, think of this from the point of view of indigenous people. Nice Western white Europeans telling you, oh, we need you off the land so we can protect it. You know, that's right. But it's going on. But it's going on right now. That's going on right now with the Maasai in Kenya and Tanzania. They're environmentalists are coming in and say, we want to make this a national park. You have to leave. That's what's going on right now. Okay, so we have to figure out a way to get the pastoralists with the domestic animals and the environmentalists who want the zebra and the giraffe and the elephant and the gazelle to work together. And this model shows it can happen. They can all benefit from it. And that will enhance tourism. You know? I mean,
it was
yeah.
the 1980s that I first heard the line that kind of changed how I started to see things, and that was, what does conservation mean to a farmer that's struggling to feed his family? And that really, it's a rhetorical one, but it gives you the pause of, okay, what's important to me isn't necessarily important to him. And how do we align those things?
Let me say something else too. We're being cosmic and having big picture discussions. The whole notion about population, human population. Well, obviously there's a lot of people in the world, right? But population dynamics, it will naturally, as the quality of living goes up, oh God, I'm blanking on the word. What's it called when you have children? Reproductive.
Fecundity.
There's a term. Anyway, it goes down.
The birth rate.
Okay. The better your living, quality of living, the less children couples have, to the point where they don't even. It's not even replacement. You know, so many of my friends now are, you know, I mean, my friends' children, whatever, millennials, they have one children or none. Right? Population in a lot of European countries is going down. So, as the standard of living goes up, population will naturally flatten and even go down. And so
Is the rate in Kenya still like much more than?
That's a good question. I'm not sure.
It was extremely high.
That's not sure. But you see, I think the quality of life can go up in these poor areas very quickly in a good way. And that this is even part of it. I don't like to get into population dynamic discussions because that gets really controversial real quick. But in terms of the natural S-curve that societies follow, as the standard of living goes up, the S-curve slows, and it not only flattens, it goes down. Naturally. No draconian methods. It's just naturally. People don't want to have as many children. So Kenya to me is like the perfect example of like everything. It's like it's perfectly located in the world. It still has big pastoral communities. It could be a very fecund grasslands. I'm honestly thinking about moving there. I'm literally trying to get a job at the University of Nairobi or something like that. I think that's the future. I think that's the future. Yeah.
Coming back to grazing and how to sequester carbon and do this mob grazing right in Jericho, Vermont. We've got an expert sitting in the back of the room here. Gary Davis has been doing this for decades.
Come on up, Gary.
I think Gary should get up and speak.
You've been nominated.
You got to stand close to me because I got the mic.
But honestly, Gary has inspired me so much with the way the not taking the second bite by making the paddocks exactly the right size for the cattle for this 12 hours, and the art of knowing this is how much they ate, this is how much they need. It's beautiful. It's amazing, and it's been happening for decades right here in Jericho.
Thank you, Gary.
She's well paid to say that.
I want
The milk is the best.
Do you sell beef or how do you maintain that?
Usually not beef. We sell raw milk.
Good for you. Maybe I'll come by tomorrow and get some.
Bring a gallon jar.
We've been getting it for 20-some years, and it's the best.
Yeah, it's good.
What breed?
Mixed. Largely Holstein based, but some other breed in there.
I'd like to do just a short little story about you, whatever. Maybe I will visit tomorrow because the dairy industry, as you know, is just being mercilessly attacked. So it'd be nice to have someone like you.
Yes.
Yeah.
I do have a question. I'm wondering if you could speak to it. It's in a slightly different direction, but it's related. And it's, I think it's confusing and seems like it may be a case of some crossed wires. But NRCS has programs where they want to buy my wetlands, and they want to buy them out of production and allow them to grow back up to wetlands because that's the environmentally sound thing to do, to get my cows and my hay cutting cropping off from those wetlands and let them be restored. But my question is, why is the U.S. government buying the rights to my wetlands to let them restore or regenerate back to wetlands when it's my understanding that wetlands are the number one natural producer of methane, which is far more detrimental to the environment than the carbon which my cows and our management of grassland is sequestering? Why would they do that?
That's a very good question, and you should ask that question.
I have.
Yeah.
They don't have an answer.
Right.
If I were to
Right.
hazard a guess on this one,
The young, also young people that come to my farm to speak with me about these programs don't have an answer. They say, I don't know. they do not seem to even know what I understand to be true about wetlands being #1 natural contributor of methane. And what it seems like is they have been taught by somebody that this is the direction we need to go. We need to restore all these wetlands. They're precious to the environment. And I'm not disputing that in some cases wetlands should be restored. But our wetlands have been pastures, maintained grassland for years, and I can't see why it's a problem or to maintain them the way they are, or why it's a benefit to our environment to let the wetlands restore.
Yeah. So, one sec. I mean, in this case, it may not be, but there might be other things, certain birds, for example, that they want. But you see, this is a perfect example of what Alan Savory would call, holistic management or holistic context. Just get everyone together and say, well, what do we want? How can we work on all this together? So that's just what I would suggest, is to raise the conversation, just start to have the conversation with people at a sort of a larger area. Yeah. Okay. Good for you.
It wasn't really appealing to me that I sell the rights to use this land in perpetuity. I get a little bit of money up front. I own it for as long as I live.
Absolutely.
I pay the taxes on it, but can't use it.
You absolutely made the right decision. Let me just say one more thing, and then Joel's going to take over. Whenever it's an either-or question, that's already a problem.
Yeah.
You see,
more of a both and.
You see, dichotomies are already a problem. That's already a systemic problem. That say, oh well, it's this or that. Okay, now Joel wants more. He wants to say about that.
And then we're going to get to you, if that's all right. And this is from a local perspective. Right now, what we've got is the EPA is the hammer that's looking for nails, and everything's a nail. So they're looking at clean water as the priority, land be damned. Doesn't matter. So they look at the wetlands as the filters. Instead of saying, hey, Burlington, why don't you get a new wastewater treatment facility, you two Montpelier, they're going after farmers because the cattle has long been demonized as a problem for water quality in the state. And it turns out that it's primarily just the CAFOs. We're learning that now. But, I had spoken, you folks know Dr. Wemple at UVM, Beverly Wemple. So Dr. Wemple was actually behind the research that identified that non-paved roads could be a primary source of phosphorus. However, I read through her research and there was something missing, so I reached out to her directly and we had a brief conversation that basically just confirmed what I thought. There's this thing where she did research, but how it's being applied is not the intent of the research. Her research was done on bottomlands through agricultural zones in New York. The EPA turned it into all unpaved roads that are a source of phosphorus. And so therefore, all roads must be paved. And I was like,
No, not just paved. You don't have to pave them. You just have to follow best practices for back roads with stormwater, drainage, and everything else.
Right, and it gets created more of a headache than if as I said to Dr. Wemple, Beverly, what if we just had some set of criteria for the engineering firms to follow, so that they can say, hey, that's an upland dirt road through a forest. There's no golf course, there's no cattle farm. That really doesn't have the same criteria as something that's going smack through Addison County. And she said, yeah, that'd probably be a good idea. So that's where that one goes. You've been waiting for a while. I appreciate it.
Having spent a lot of my professional career dealing with wetland mitigation.
Oh.
The rationale, again, you have to look at the location, and this is where the regulations aren't always helpful.
Yep.
Because the whole purpose is water quality, and wetlands are a very good way to deal with both silt and organics runoff.
Yep.
But again, where they are, and you know, whether you're trying to restore something in a location where it really would work and create the conditions you need, it's hard when you have to work with the regulations.
Yeah, no. I'm trying to pull punches here now.
But the other question I had is, are you familiar with wetland management? I think you are. I mean, you're doing it. But I don't know.
Oh, Voisin.
People-
Andre Voisin. He was the mentor to Alan Savory.
Oh. Well, I know that the Minor Center over in New York has been a big proponent of that.
Yep.
And there are farmers, or there were at one time when I was involved with doing some work for the Ag Department, that we're practicing that here in Vermont.
And it's, you know, there's.
But it wasn't to restore the land. It was more that it was more economical for them.
Yeah. Well, and that's
if you had the right kind of land.
That's the bottom line for the producers. They'll all say, look, it just makes more sense for me. I'm not doing this necessarily
But even
for a larger goal, though. Of course, it's appealing. You know, it just economically, it just makes sense. Less money on fertilizer. You don't buy the seeds every year. All this other stuff. You know, you need to talk to them, but that's basically the case. If it didn't work at the end of the day economically for the producers, who are conservative, you know, tend to be conservative folks anyway, they wouldn't bother doing it. So it has to work economically, and the general public can help somehow by buying those products, but also, you know, getting involved with politics to change some of the regulations so that they put a value on soil, for example. You know, the whole thing like tax meat, I mean, my head explodes when I hear that. How about tax erosion? You know, and then I was at the climate conference last time, and these people were walking around. They said they wanted a plant-based treaty. How about a soil-based treaty? See, so Vermont there's some good people in Vermont government. You know, we're friends with Bernie's staff. There's a whole movement now called Regenerate America. Has anyone heard of that? Regenerate America. You know, when you go home, just pull them up on the web, get involved with them. You know, there's a whole movement to try and revamp the Farm Bill. And my understanding is they're making some progress. I mean, obviously the Farm Bill is going to be controlled by the big players. We know that. But they are making dents, at least. They're making inroads into changing it, and more congressmen and women are you know, it's an opportunity to have these hearings in Washington, which is happening. So if you can get involved with Regenerate America, I would suggest doing so, and then call your state reps and ask about what they're doing to get the Farm Bill changes to reward people who are restoring their land, valuing soil. This is how you can be involved.
And you know, this one will strike to some of what we touched on earlier. Yes, Wisconsin, I'm talking to you. And Gary, you would probably echo this. In a state our size that is very thin, very agriculturally oriented, we still have conflicts between. The owl is hooting at us.
It's the hooting owl.
We have conflicts between wanting to give him wetlands instead of the grazing, but they would rubber stamp him tiling his property, which, you know, tiling is. Do you know what tiling is? It's basically putting making your entire field a leach field. Effectively, it takes the surface water off and puts it below the soil, the surface level, for drainage purposes, because we have a lot of clay, schistose, and you know, poorly drained soils in Vermont, So that's the solution that is utilized. I think Conants have a direct injection system for their manure over Williston there. And it's like, okay, you can do one thing,
Yeah.
but it's in conflict with what you're telling us over here. And it's like, if we can't, at a small state with, all the farmers know each other because they're not that big group anymore, that we can't properly regulate in such a way that we're giving them clear messaging and proper directions, and even answering the questions of why. Take that type of a problem and put it on Nebraska or Texas.
Regenerative grazing has obviously not made it into the narrative of policy.
Yeah.
And so it's really, it's like, well, we could do this or we could do that. The notion that things can be getting better while you're producing food. That concept itself is just gone, right? So that notion, that paradigm of thinking has to make it to the level of policy. So everyone here can help with that. Listen, it's almost 10 of. I'm ready for a beer and a burger. So is it okay if we start to wrap up?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, I want to thank you all for coming out and the hosts. Thank you.
I don't think that Murray Bookchin and Arnie Ness would have gotten together as well as we did tonight. But I can spot a Bookchinite anywhere.
Well, thank you very much.
Yeah.
Great.
Thank you. Yeah, no, this was great.
That reference is